The remains of 14 people killed in the Srebrenica genocide have been laid to rest, marking the first International Day of Remembrance for the 1995 genocide. This was the most devastating mass killing in Europe since World War II. More than 8,000 mainly Muslim men and boys were taken from Srebrenica and murdered by Bosnian Serb forces. Now, for more on this, I'm joined by Claire Harriott, who's standing by for us in Srebrenica. Claire, the events of today, the ceremony is drawing to a close now. What's been taking place there?
What we've seen here in Srebrenica is a really very poignant, very moving ceremony involving prayer. There was some music as well, and of course the burial of the remains of 14 people who were murdered during the 1995 Srebrenica genocide by Bosnian Serb forces. The youngest of those people was only 17 years old when he was killed, and so people have been coming here to remember the scale of the atrocity and to bury those remains. The reason that there are funerals, every year is because what happens here is people are still looking for the remains of some of the dead. They were in a indication of just how violent this whole episode was, that people were murdered, buried in mass graves, and then in an attempt to cover up what happened, the Bosnian Serb forces then dug up those graves and scattered the remains across several different sites. So each year there's a burial because these are the remains that have been found and identified during the previous 12 months since the previous July 11th. So the remains of these 14 people who were buried here today, those were the remains that have been located, identified since July 11th last year. So that's the kind of the itinerary of what happened. And the mood is always, very somber, very reflective as people come here to lay flowers and pray for the victims and, of course, for their families, because there are still many families whose loved ones have simply not been found. And so there's an extra kind of grief for those families as well. But all in all, a very moving ceremony today in Srebrenica.
This is the first year since the UNGA voted to declare July the 11th as the International Day of Remembrance. How important is that to people there?
On the 23rd of May this year, the UN General Assembly voted 84 votes to 19 with 6 to 8 abstentions to make July 11th, to declare July 11th the International Day of Remembrance for the Srebrenica genocide. That's something that gives the date, July 11th, a certain gravitas, international recognition, and that's something that's very important to the victims' families. For one thing, what they've said to us is it makes them feel less alone in their grief. They think that the rest of the world is also marking this. I mean, the rest of the world, as I say, there were, when you add up the no votes and the abstentions, actually greater than the number that voted for it, but that's doesn't matter. It's not how it works. This vote was carried, and this is now United Nations policy. This is the International Day of Remembrance for the Srebrenica genocide, and so that they find that very important to have that international recognition. And of course, as somebody said to us this morning, one of the organisers of this event, the UN and the world failed the people of Srebrenica in 1995. So to have that recognition, that goes some way to kind of make up for that, and that's something that the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has also said in his remarks today in a statement that the UN published on his behalf earlier on Thursday, that this was something that the UN failed the people of Srebrenica, and so this is one of the reasons why it's so important that this day be marked and have that recognition.
Claire Harriott, line for us from Srebrenica. Thank you so much, Claire. And Rahul Radhakrishnan takes a look back now at the horror that unfolded in July in 1995.
It was a catastrophic failing of international peacekeeping. The genocide of Srebrenica tarnished the reputation of the United Nations and exposed the inability of leading nations to work together and deal with such conflict. A UN report into its own affairs, presented in 1999 by the then Secretary Kofi Annan, concluded with the words, "Bosnia was as much a moral cause as a military conflict. The tragedy of Srebrenica will haunt our history forever." The UN was, belatedly, condemning its own tendency to try and remain neutral in a civil conflict.
You refuse to confront what is effectively an enemy, an aggressor who are killing civilians, because you may have to negotiate with them for humanitarian access. But that is largely the position that was taken.
Things were changing in the way the international community could respond. Srebrenica and its horrors became a watershed. Within weeks, NATO forces had bombarded Bosnian Serb positions, too late for many. But it forced the start of a peace process, leading to the 1995 Dayton Accords, which ended the wars in the former Yugoslavia, spearheaded by the US and its negotiator Richard Holbrooke, signed in Paris in December of that year. At the same time, a quiet legal process was finding its feet. General Ratko Mladic and Bosnian Serb leader Radovan Karadzic on charges of war crimes and genocide.
What I know is that many Muslim soldiers have been killed through the forests, and how they have been buried, I don't know.
When Kosovo was threatened by Serbia in 1999, there was a concerted reaction as NATO intervened to end violence between ethnic Albanians and Serbs. The indictments and arrests from the Balkan Wars culminated in the trials of Serbian President Slobodan Milosevic, who died in custody. And after years on the run, the arrests and sentencing of Mladic and Karadzic. There is no real closure for the bereaved. Nothing heals the misery of those days in 1995. But there is now a template for war crimes investigations and trials, no matter how long it takes. A legacy of Bosnia and of Srebrenica. Rahul Radhakrishnan, TRT World.
And Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says the efforts to bring justice on Srebrenica should serve as a warning to those responsible for the massacres in Gaza.
29 yıl önce
The people in Gaza and the occupied Palestinian territories are exposed to a brutality similar to the one experienced in Srebrenica 29 years ago. International institutions and organizations are just watching the murder of approximately 40,000 innocent people, including 16,000 children, just like 29 years ago. The whole world is going through a test of humanity and sincerity. I want it to be known that those responsible for the barbarism in Gaza will, sooner or later, be held accountable before international law, just like in Srebrenica. As Turkey, we will continue to do our best to ensure that justice is served and the perpetrators of the massacre are held responsible.
And President Erdogan has declared July the 11th a special day in Turkey, marking the international reflection and commemoration of the genocide in Srebrenica. Turkish Head of Communications Fahrettin Altun released this message.
July 11th is one of the most painful chapters in modern history that has yet to be closed. The agony of the Srebrenica genocide, marked as the greatest human tragedy in Europe since World War II, still grips our hearts even after 29 long years. Tragedies should serve as lessons for all of humanity. Amidst the relentless genocide unfolding in Gaza, there are valuable lessons for all to learn from Srebrenica, urging us to strive for a livable world where human dignity is cherished and preserved. Ratko Mladic, etched in history as the butcher of Bosnia, like those who perpetuate the genocide in Gaza today, was tragically blinded by ideology and ignored the pleas of reason, common sense, and conscience. I pray for Allah's mercy upon the Bosnian war victims who were massacred throughout brotherly Bosnia and Herzegovina, particularly those who endured genocide in Srebrenica, all Bosnian martyrs, and Alija Izetbegovic, the president of the independent Bosnia and Herzegovina, who showed the world that even war has its ethics.